We see this as an opportunity for growth, of course. That was the first sentence. No greeting, no warning. Just a corporate prelude to a slap in the face. The room was too quiet for 900 a.m. Tuesday, I sat across from Craig in the glass conference pod they'd just installed last quarter. Open design. No blinds like they wanted the whole office to see who was being summoned and who wasn't. He had the kind of smile you'd expect from someone pretending this was just a tough conversation. But I could already see the manila folder before he slid it forward, labeled in bold compensation adjustments. Q4 strategic plan. Craig leaned back, fingers steepled like he was about to pitch a TED Talk. "You've been instrumental to our enterprise accounts," he said. "Truly. But as we optimize for efficiency, we're asking key leaders to lead by example. That means accepting a temporary 42% reduction." I blinked once. Twice. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I didn't want him to hear me breathe too hard. My name is Harper. I've been with Ardentix since year 2, long before Craig showed up with his MBA smile and spreadsheet buzzwords. I built the enterprise pipeline, closed the first 7-figure deal, onboarded every key client in the system. But none of that mattered this morning, because now apparently leadership meant being the first to bleed. He ended with the kind of phrase they love to throw in for flavor. "If this isn't something you feel aligned with, we understand, but we'll have to revisit your role." A threat dressed in polyester language. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him of the hours or the numbers or the names on the wall outside the ones I'd brought in. I simply reached for the pen on the table. My hand trembled slightly just for a second. Then I gripped it tightly and let a small professional smile stretch across my lips. Craig smiled back, relieved. He thought I was agreeing. He had no idea what I was really thinking. He smiled. I didn't. The hallway outside that glass conference room still echoed with Craig's voice, even after I'd left temporary reduction, strategic move. "You're a leader." I walked back to my desk like nothing happened, my smile still faint professional. But my mind wasn't in the office anymore. It was in that tiny 2-room space we once called headquarters, before Ardentix had sleek logos and catered lunches. Back then, there was no Craig, just me, 2 engineers and Ryan, the founder, the dreamer, the guy who couldn't write a pitch deck but could talk about future-proof platforms until sunrise. He didn't know how to invoice a client, but he knew I could figure it out, so I did. 3 months, no pay. Just ramen, gas station coffee, and a mattress I kept behind the server rack. I slept there more times than I want to admit, not because I didn't have options, but because I believed in what we were building. The CRM system, that was me. The spreadsheets, the onboarding flow, the pitch to our first real client. Me. I was 26, broke and terrified, and I was all in. I remember the night I signed the contract with our first major account. Ryan and I had just come back from a meeting that went better than expected. We didn't have legal support yet, so I drafted the whole thing myself on my laptop sitting on the floor next to the router. He looked at me and said, "If this thing actually works, Harper, you'll be the foundation, the one we build it all on." I smiled like a kid who just got picked first in gym class. And you know what? For a while he meant it. He gave me space, autonomy. I built the systems, the relationships, the culture. I became the person clients called first, and the person who never got credit in the press releases. Then came growth. Then came layers. Then came Craig with his performance reviews, his optimization plans, and that ever-present tone of someone who thinks they discovered the wheel when they're just riding it downhill. And now I'm told I'm lucky to still be here if I accept a 42% cut, of course. I'm supposed to feel grateful. But here's the thing. I'm still proud of what I built, of who I was when no one was watching, when no one was promising a raise or a bonus or a better title. That version of me, she was unstoppable, and maybe they forgot her. But I didn't. Turns out they built the empire on my back, then cut me off at the knees. People expect rage. When you're wronged, they think you'll slam doors, flip desks, make a scene. But the most dangerous kind of anger doesn't yell. It waits. I didn't quit. Not yet. The morning after Craig handed me that insult wrapped in corporate ribbon, I showed up early, wore navy, tied my hair back, brought donuts for the team. They thought I was fine, maybe even loyal. But inside, I was already moving away quietly. I sat at my desk, just like always, and logged into the admin console of our CRM. My name still had the crown icon, full access master credentials, no expiration, no oversight. Nobody had ever updated it, probably because they forgot who built it in the first place. I downloaded everything. Client portfolios, payment histories, contract versions, all the raw communications. Clean, organized folders, labeled, encrypted, quietly uploaded to a private drive they didn't know existed. In between meetings, I reviewed every contract I'd ever signed on behalf of Ardentix. There were more than I remembered. Some of them still named me as the authorized point of contact. A few hadn't even been transferred to corporate signatory amateurs. At lunch, I sat with the team laughing politely at jokes I'd heard 100 times. They didn't notice how I stopped taking notes, stopped participating in brainstorming sessions. I wasn't adding ideas. I was taking inventory. By 4 p.m., I was in the archives room, pulling old vendor record systems we'd used. Vendors. We dropped the gaps. No one remembered except the person who set them up, me. Every step I took looked like routine maintenance, but under the surface, I was stitching together the map of their weakest points. No one suspected a thing. Not Craig, who passed me in the hallway with his usual condescension. Not the interns who still came to me with questions because I knew where everything actually was. Not even the IT guy who once asked me if I could help him find something in the back end. I built the back end. That entire week, I smiled. I held meetings, sent reports, gave status updates like everything was normal. But when I got home, I'd open my laptop and finish what I'd started, one file at a time, one connection at a time, one quiet, strategic withdrawal at a time. Because I wasn't walking away in shame. I was walking away in silence, and I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving armed. I didn't schedule the lunch. It was already on the calendar, an account check-in with Devin Blake, Director of Ops at Kelridge Systems. One of our oldest clients. One of mine. The restaurant was the same as always, neutral lighting, overpriced salads, quiet booths. We met there quarterly to align strategy, but those meetings had always been more than business. Devin and I had spent 7 years building trust over coffee and contract revisions. He knew my instincts. I knew his hesitations before he even voiced them. This time, though, he watched me more than he listened. I gave the usual update, current project pacing, cross-functional integrations, future projections. Every word measured, every sentence safe. He didn't interrupt, but when I paused for water, he leaned forward slightly and said, "You're not okay." It wasn't a question, and I didn't deny it. I simply folded my hands in my lap and said, "There's been a shift internally." That was all I gave him. No names, no complaints, no bitterness. Just a truth quietly placed on the table. He exhaled slowly. I figured the emails feel colder, like someone else is talking through you. He studied my face. Are you leaving? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence said enough. After a long pause, he reached across the table and placed a steady hand on my forearm. Harper, if you go, we follow. That was it. No negotiation, no drama, just a line drawn in absolute clarity. I felt something catch in my throat. Not sadness, not even relief. Something deeper. Validation. For years I'd shown up not just to sell, but to solve. I'd answered calls at midnight, pulled weekends, walked them through product crashes and executive tantrums, but I'd never known if it really mattered, if I mattered, or just the Ardentics name behind me. And now I had my answer. I didn't trash the company. I didn't need to. Devon saw what was happening from the outside, the shift in tone, the layers of detachment, the slow erosion of intention. He finished his drink and stood. Then, almost like an afterthought, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "We don't work with systems. We work with people. Don't forget that." I nodded, unable to speak. Not because I was afraid, but because for the first time in weeks, I felt seen. As I walked back to the office, my steps felt different, like something had shifted inside me, not out of vengeance, out of clarity. Their loyalty was never to the logo, it was to the person who showed up for them. The office looks different at night. No voices, no phones, just the low hum of machines that never sleep. It was 11:04 p.m. when I stepped off the elevator badge, still active cameras, still blinking red to green. No alarms, no questions. After all, I had clearance. Too much of it. I walked past the "We Are Ardentics" mural without looking at it. I wasn't there for sentiment. I was there for leverage. The servers were housed in the east wing 2 floors down from the executive suites where Craig liked to stage manage his mornings. I took the back corridor, key-carded in, and sat at the same terminal I'd used 10 years ago when we only had 6 clients and 1 rusty firewall. Now the system was sprawling, layered, bloated from years of patches and politics, but I still knew the core. My fingers hovered over the keyboard just for a moment, then I began. Step 1. Access Audit. I identified every user with administrative privileges and began revoking them quietly, one by one. No alerts, just a slow erasure of their authority. Step 2. Data Backup. I exported every active contract payment trail and project file into a secure private cloud under legal compliance. Not stolen, just preserved. The originals would remain, of course, but access, that was changing. Step 3. Firewall Lockdown. I initiated a sequence that disabled remote logins from external devices. Craig's laptop, the CFO's tablet, the consultants they'd outsourced last month. By the time they realized it, the doors would already be sealed. Every click was surgical, every move traceable, yet defensible. I wasn't deleting, I wasn't destroying, I was containing. And the whole time my heart raced like I was defusing a bomb. But my hands steady. At 11:52 p.m., I opened the CRM's master settings, one menu most people didn't even know existed. From there, I reset the primary encryption key. One key. One keystroke. A cold wave passed over me as I hit enter. The system blinked. Not crashed, just paused, like it knew something had shifted. A second later, the screen refreshed. Every command I had queued was now active. The system didn't scream. It didn't fight back. It simply obeyed the hands that once built it. I sat back in the chair, breathing slowly, calm, focused. This wasn't revenge. It was design. By midnight, I'd wiped my fingerprints clean, cleared browser history, logged out of the admin shell like I was just another late-night analyst catching up on reports. I walked out the same way I walked in. No one saw me, no one stopped me, but tomorrow they'd feel it. One keystroke, and the empire blinked. At 7:46 a.m., Craig's inbox chimed with a new message. It came from my address. It had no subject line. It had no greeting, just one sentence. "You may want to check your access." That was all. No anger, No accusations, no passive-aggressive phrasing or legal threats, just a simple notification as calm and cold as morning steel. I'd scheduled the send the night before, just minutes after finishing the lockdown. I'd timed it to arrive right before his daily huddle with the ops team, just as he'd be booting up his dashboard to display client retention metrics. Calculated, absolutely, but not malicious. Precision isn't cruelty, it's clarity. I didn't stick around to watch him open it. I wasn't in the building that morning. Instead, I sat in my apartment by the window, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the early sunlight paint soft streaks across my hardwood floor. My laptop was still open. The screen dimmed slightly, the cursor blinking at the end of that one line. I didn't type anything else, didn't edit, didn't overthink it. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen as it slowly faded to black, like the final shot of a film where the hero walks off frame, silent and unbothered. It felt like that. Not revenge, not victory, just closure. He would open the system and find the locks reset, the pathways, close the access denied. The CRM would no longer respond to his credentials. The files he thought he controlled would request new authorization. Admin logs would show nothing out of order because technically everything done was within scope. The digital footprint, clean. The legal grounds, untouchable. Let them dig. Let them panic. There was nothing illegal, nothing traceable as sabotage, just a slow rebalancing of power they never realized had shifted. And somewhere between SIP 3 and 4, I realized something else. I wasn't shaking. The Harper from a month ago would have second-guessed, would have wondered if this was too far or too soon, but that Harper was gone. This one. She didn't need validation. I closed the laptop with a soft click and exhaled. No adrenaline, no triumph, just stillness. A strange kind of stillness, the kind that comes after the storm, even if no one else knew it had passed yet. Craig would not immediately, but soon. He'd feel the ripple. He'd trace the silence. He'd see the single sentence sitting in his inbox and understand it wasn't a warning. It was a verdict. No curse words, no threats, just the quiet before collapse. It started quietly. An account manager couldn't access the CRM. Then another. By 8:30, the operations floor was buzzing, phones in the air, voices clipped and rising. Password resets failed. Admin panels returned. Blank reports didn't load. Craig arrived at 8:37, coffee in hand, confusion already creasing his brow. "Why is marketing locked out?" he asked, walking toward the glass conference room. No one answered. Then came the second wave client calls. 3 within the first 10 minutes. "Our portal credentials are invalid. We received a termination notice. Was that intentional? We'd like to speak with Harper." By 8:51, Craig was no longer holding his coffee. He'd placed it on the nearest table and forgotten about it. His voice cut across the floor like a whip. "Where is Harper? Get it in here now." In the server room, 2 junior engineers were already hunched over terminals trying to trace access logs. The head of infrastructure arrived 10 minutes later, hair unbrushed, tie undone, panic barely concealed behind professional phrasing. "Someone initiated a multi-layer credential lockout at the root level," he said flatly. Craig blinked. "In English, admin permissions have been revoked. Not just reassigned, erased. Whoever did this had full system access. Not even super user override works, then reset it. We can't. The keys are tied to an authorization protocol that traces back to Harper." Craig froze. "She revoked us." "No, she owned it. Still does. Most of the contracts, especially our legacy enterprise accounts, they're still under her name as signatory. Legally, we can't touch those without her." A long, terrible silence followed. Across the floor, someone dropped a phone. A client had just pulled out $112 million in recurring revenue gone in a single sentence. By 10:00 a.m., 4 more clients had requested immediate offboarding. 2 others asked for Harper directly bypassing their account reps entirely. Craig stood in his office, fists clenched, watching the company he'd optimized unravel in real time. Every system he thought he controlled was slipping through his fingers like sand. He called legal, he called HR, he called compliance. They all had the same answer. "We need to speak with Harper." Outside, the morning sun was blinding. Inside, everything was breaking. Desks were deserted, Slack channels frozen, executives whispering behind closed doors. The open concept floor plan had turned into a battlefield of denial and dread. Someone asked if we'd been hacked, but there was no breach, no data stolen, no system corrupted. The company wasn't hacked. It was simply reclaimed. The call came just past midnight. I was already awake. Not because I was anxious, far from it. I was calm in a way that felt almost unreal. The kind of calm that only arrives when you've burned every bridge on purpose and still know exactly where you're going next. The phone vibrated once Craig Parker. The name lit up on my screen like an aftershock. I let it ring twice before answering Harper. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "We need to talk." I said nothing. "I don't understand." He continued faster now, like he was chasing his own breath. "This isn't fair. Why would you do this?" There it was. Not a question of what I did. He already knew, not how, but why. I took a slow breath, steady and full. My voice didn't shake. "You wrote the rules," I said quietly. I just followed them. There was a pause. A long one. On the other end, I could hear the faint sound of papers being shuffled. Maybe contracts, maybe chaos, maybe denial. "You could have said something." He tried again. "You could have come to me." I did, I replied. "You just didn't hear it because I didn't beg." More silence, and then came the unraveling, the part where power drains from a man who never thought he'd lose it. "You built this place," Craig said, his voice soft now, almost mournful. "But you're destroying it." "No," I corrected him. "You destroyed it the moment you thought I was disposable." He had no response to that, just breathing. Uncertain, uneven. And somewhere in that stillness, I realized I wasn't angry anymore, not even bitter. I was done. This wasn't revenge, it was release. I stood by the window, staring out at the empty street below. The city lights flickered across the glass, but all I saw was reflection. I didn't need validation from him. I didn't need closure wrapped in apologies or panic. What I had now was better control. Control of my time, control of my worth, control of what came next. Craig finally spoke again, barely above a whisper. "So what now?" I let the silence stretch between us like a canyon. Then I said, "Now I move on, and you clean up what's left." I ended the call. No rage, no satisfaction, scream, just a quiet click, the sound of finality. He thought he'd backed me into a corner. I was already holding the exit key. The first morning at the new office felt nothing like the old ones. No fluorescent buzz. No empty catchphrases on the walls. Just a sunlit workspace filled with quiet focus and soft laughter. Real people doing real work without performance theater. They didn't give me a corner office. I didn't ask for one. They gave me trust. Civica was smaller, leaner, a consultancy built by former insiders who'd had enough of bloated hierarchies and hollow mission statements. When I walked into my onboarding meeting, the CEO, Amira, stood up and said, "You don't need to prove anything here. We know who you are." I didn't smile. Not out of coldness, just out of disbelief. No one had said those words to me in years. By noon, I had 6 missed calls. 3 from clients who had already reached out to Civica asking if I was really there. 2 had contracts ready. The 6th was Devin from Kelridge Systems, who didn't even ask for a presentation. He just said, "We're in. You tell us where to sign." It wasn't dramatic. There were no banners, no headlines, no viral LinkedIn posts, just quiet transitions, smooth handovers, mutual understanding between professionals who knew who had really been showing up for them all along. By the end of the week, 6 former Ardentix accounts were now mine, no NDAs broken, no bridges burned, just movement. And while Craig and his board scrambled to restore confidence, I was too busy building something that didn't require saving. Every call I took, every client I welcomed, reminded me of who I'd been before all the politics, before I'd been asked to shrink, before I'd been told to lead by example by sacrificing the value I'd spent a decade creating. Now no one asked me to prove I belonged. They just listened and followed. And that was the greatest victory of all. Not the collapse behind me, but the construction ahead. I didn't need them to fail. They did that on their own, by forgetting what mattered. But here in this quiet new chapter, I remembered. I remembered what it felt like to be trusted, to be heard, to be chosen not because of a logo, but because of the loyalty I'd earned over years of showing up when no one else would. I didn't walk into Civica to prove anything. I walked in to begin again. And this time, I wasn't just building systems or relationships. I was building a life with the right people on the right terms. Revenge was never the goal. Building better was. When I left Ardentix for the last time, I didn't make a scene. No long speeches. No drawn-out goodbyes. No boxes stacked with desk trinkets and farewell cupcakes. Just one small cardboard container, inside a silver USB drive and a 5x7 photo frame wrapped in a blue microfiber cloth. That was it. The USB held every file I had legal rights to, templates I'd built, documents I'd authored, systems I'd architected. Nothing stolen, nothing shady. Just the parts that were mine. The digital imprint of 10 years of work distilled into a sliver of metal, no bigger than my thumb. The photo, that was older, a grainy snapshot from our second month in the original office. 7 of us in hoodies and mismatched chairs, grinning like fools under a flickering fluorescent light. Ryan, our idealist founder, had his arms slung around my shoulder. I still had bangs. We had no funding, no clients, no idea what we were doing, but we had belief. And in that frozen moment, no one was jockeying for titles or drafting salary cuts. We were just trying to build something that mattered. I looked at the photo one last time before slipping it into the box. My thumb traced the corner of the frame. A small crack ran through the glass. I hadn't replaced it. Somehow it felt honest. Walking through the empty lobby, I passed by the new branding wall. Bold, corporate, sterile Ardentix had grown slick, polished, but in all the shine, it had forgotten its soul. At the exit, the security guard Robert, who'd been there even before Craig, nodded. "Heading out early today, Harper." I smiled. "Yeah, for good." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He just tipped his cap and said, "Well, they lost the best part of this place." I stepped outside. The air was crisp. A quiet wind swept past, and for a moment I stood still, box in hands, heart light. Did I feel loss? Of course, 10 years doesn't leave without leaving something behind, but regret. No, I didn't regret building Ardentix. I regretted believing they'd protect what we built together, but that was their failure, not mine. As I walked toward the curb, a black sedan pulled up. Civica had sent a car, another quiet gesture that told me I was no longer invisible. I placed the box gently on the seat beside me. One USB. One frame. That's all I needed, because sometimes walking away isn't surrender. It's clarity. It's knowing when something no longer deserves you. They kept the name. I kept the network and the proof it all started with me.
What would you do if the salary they cut from you ended up funding a luxury gift for someone who had done nothing to deserve it? That thought hit me like a slap the moment I saw the invoice. A brand new Bugatti, purchased just days after our company slashed everyone's pay by 40% under the excuse of financial hardship. I had believed our sacrifices meant something. That belief shattered with a single email attachment. If you've ever watched loyalty get sold for luxury, leave a like below to remind ourselves that true value can't be bought. But to understand how everything unraveled so quickly, you need to know where I had placed all my trust. For 11 years, I built my life around this company. I was there when we were still leasing a shabby 2-story building downtown. I stayed through leadership changes, mergers, economic crashes, anchored by the belief that loyalty would eventually be rewarded. We weren't just coworkers, we were a family. At least, that's what they told us. Jessica Walker, Senior Financial Analyst. It wasn't a glamorous title, but I wore it like a badge of honor. I believed in what we did. I believed in the people I worked beside. And, most dangerously, I believed that the ones at the top cared as much as we did. The cracks started showing 2 years ago, when rumors about favoritism began circulating. Promotions that didn't make sense, nepotism hidden under the polite language of strategic development opportunities, lavish executive parties whispered about in the hallways, but every time doubt crept in, I smothered it. You don't abandon ship because the deck creaks a little. Then came February. We were summoned to an emergency town hall meeting, an ominous phrase no employee ever wants to hear. They packed us into the largest conference room, the air thick with worry. I remember the HR director standing at the front with a clipboard, clearing her throat before announcing what sounded almost rehearsed. Due to unexpected financial setbacks, we must implement a temporary 40% reduction in salary across all departments, effective immediately. The room went still. I watched colleagues I had known for over a decade slump back in their chairs. No one yelled, no one protested. We were too stunned. We were professionals. We internalized everything. Joe Whitman sat 2 rows ahead of me, 53 years old, 2 teenage sons, recently divorced. He didn't say a word, but the way he kept squeezing the armrests gave him away. After the meeting, the parking lot felt like a funeral procession. People shuffled to their cars with mechanical movements, clutching their briefcases like life rafts. That's when I saw it. Parked front and center, gleaming like a cruel joke under the gray winter sun, was Mr. Caldwell's brand new BMW. White leather seats, custom chrome rims, a fresh dealer plate still dangling from the rear. It wasn't just a car, it was a billboard screaming that our sacrifices were nothing compared to their indulgences. Still, I told myself stories to make it okay. Maybe he bought it before the financial trouble. Maybe he regretted it. Maybe he didn't even realize how bad it looked. I wanted to believe the best of him. But belief is a dangerous thing when the truth is fighting to break through. The following week, the company held what they called a reset meeting. Posters with inspiring slogans went up overnight. Stronger together. We weather storms as one. The conference room buzzed with cautious optimism as people filed in. Maybe, just maybe, leadership had realized how bad things looked. Maybe transparency and fairness were on their way back. Mr. Caldwell stood at the front, all smiles and polished charisma. He talked about unity, resilience, and how proud he was of the sacrifices everyone had made. "We're turning a corner," he said. "There's a path forward for all of us." Some part of me wanted to believe him. When he opened the floor for questions, a few brave souls dared to raise concerns. "Will there be equity in how financial recovery is handled?" one woman asked. "Will executive bonuses be suspended until employee salaries are restored?" Another pressed. Mr. Caldwell's smile thinned slightly, but he nodded along. "Absolutely," he said. "Leadership will be reviewing everything. No one is above sacrifice. We're all equals in this fight. It sounded good. Too good. I glanced around the room. Some faces looked reassured. Joe, sitting toward the back, allowed a tiny smile to break through his guarded expression. I felt my chest ease, just a little. Maybe we hadn't been fools to believe in this place. Maybe justice wasn't just a slogan after all. But then it happened. Small, almost imperceptible if you weren't looking closely. When someone from accounting tentatively brought up concerns about specific, executive expenditures, Mr. Caldwell's expression flickered. Barely a heartbeat's worth of annoyance passed over his face before he smoothed it away. He leaned forward, voice silky. We trust our leadership teams to make responsible decisions aligned with the company's best interests. A practiced answer, non-committal, slick. Something cold curled in my stomach. After the meeting, I lingered near the hallway outside the executive elevators. I didn't even know why. Instinct, maybe. That's when I overheard it. Two mid-level managers, unaware anyone was nearby, whispered about the car. About how the CFO had joked that the Bugatti was a necessary morale boost for the CEO's family after all the stress. A morale boost. Bought with the wages they stripped from single parents, veterans, and aging employees nearing retirement. Whatever fragile hope the meeting had sparked in me died a quick, merciless death. I walked out of that building into the bitter February wind with a clarity I hadn't had in years. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't poor timing or bad optics. It was deliberate, calculated. And they expected us to smile through it. They thought we were too beaten down to fight back. They were wrong. Hope can be a dangerous thing when it's built on quicksand. By Wednesday, whispers were growing louder. Small things, the way certain questions went unanswered, the subtle shifts in who was invited to strategy sessions. People who dared to push too hard were mysteriously absent from meetings the next day. Joe was one of them. I found him standing by the coffee station that afternoon, hands shoved deep into his pockets, his face drawn and pale. They reassigned me, he said in a low voice, demoted me to data auditing. It was a job 3 pay grades below his, a job usually reserved for interns fresh out of community college. No reason, no explanation, just pushed aside. I felt something fracture deep inside me. Joe wasn't confrontational. He had simply asked, in a trembling voice during the town hall, if executives would be taking cuts too. That was his crime. Asking. The next blow came fast. An anonymous email circulated late Thursday night. Screenshots from the internal finance system. Executive bonuses had quietly been processed that same week, hidden under a restructured leadership retention fund. Millions of dollars, paid out days after slashing the wages of the people who actually kept the company running. It felt like being gutted with a dull knife. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, the fluorescent glow burning my eyes, the rage rising slow and poisonous inside me. I wasn't alone. Slack channels buzzed in coded messages, DMs whispered outrage and disbelief. But fear kept everyone paralyzed. Fear of losing their jobs, their health insurance, their livelihoods. Fear is how they win. That night, I closed my laptop and made a decision. If we didn't fight back, they would bury us alive under corporate spin and pretty speeches. If we stayed silent, we deserved the cage they built for us. I thought about Joe's sons, about the receptionist, Carla, who was working 2 jobs now because she couldn't afford rent anymore. About the warehouse supervisor, Hank, who quietly put his house on the market 2 days after the pay cut. They deserved better. We all did. Have you ever stayed silent when you knew you should have spoken up? What made you hold back, or what finally pushed you forward? Share your story in the comments below. You never know who you might inspire. By Friday morning, my mind was sharp, colder than it had ever been. I wasn't going to storm into the CEO's office. I wasn't going to scream or demand justice like a fool. They expected anger. They were prepared for it. I would do the one thing they never saw coming. I would use their own arrogance against them, because the truth was written all over their emails, buried in their financial reports, stored neatly in folders labeled confidential, on a network they thought no one cared enough to audit. They trusted that exhaustion would keep us compliant, that fear would keep us docile, that loyalty would keep us blind. They were wrong on all three counts. As I quietly gathered every damning piece of evidence, every signature, every wire transfer confirmation, I realized something. They had underestimated the one thing they couldn't buy: conviction. And I was about to remind them why you should never mistake kindness for weakness. The most dangerous moves are made in silence. By Monday, I had what I needed. Enough files to build a case strong enough to shake the walls of the boardroom. But having proof and using it wisely were two very different things. I couldn't afford mistakes. Not when the people I wanted to expose still controlled the security cameras, the HR files, the narrative. One slip, one premature accusation, and I'd be the one escorted out of the building with a cardboard box and a security guard shadowing my every step. So I planned, slowly, carefully. First, I mapped out the chain of evidence. I cataloged every transaction, every suspicious expense, every misdirected fund. I cross-referenced emails, call logs, and calendar entries until the entire web lay clear and undeniable. No speculation, no guesses, only cold, hard facts. Next, I identified who could actually do something with it. Not middle management, they were already bought or too afraid. Not HR, they were the company's attack dogs. The board, specifically Mr. Langston, the head of the audit committee. A man who built his reputation on transparency and compliance, and who, rumor had it, had never been fully aligned with Mr. Caldwell's more creative practices. He was the only real opening. But even that was risky. If I approached Langston wrong, he'd alert Caldwell. If I came across as bitter or vengeful, my information would be dismissed as the ravings of a disgruntled employee. I needed to be clinical, professional. I needed to give him no choice but to act. I spent that week quietly assembling a package, a clean, well-organized digital report of my findings, complete with source documents and timestamps. A report that could survive scrutiny, legal review, and public exposure if necessary. At the same time, I prepared my insurance. I encrypted copies of everything and sent them to a private secure cloud account only I could access. I wrote a statement detailing the entire discovery process to be automatically emailed to key journalists if anything suspicious happened to me. Paranoia? Maybe. But paranoia had a way of keeping people alive when powerful enemies were involved. Every day, I smiled at my colleagues. I attended meetings. I submitted reports. I played the part of a loyal employee clinging to hope. Inside, I was building the guillotine they never saw coming. They thought the salary cuts had crushed our spirits. They thought handing out a few bonuses behind closed doors would keep their empire intact. They thought loyalty was infinite. They were wrong. I finalized everything by Thursday afternoon. The USB drive sat heavy in my purse as I made my way toward the parking garage, heart pounding. Tomorrow, during the scheduled board meeting, I would deliver the evidence, anonymously through a third-party system the board maintained for compliance tips. Designed to protect whistleblowers, ironically set up by the very people who now needed to be exposed. It felt fitting somehow. That night, lying awake staring at the ceiling, I thought of Joe, of Carla, of Hank. I thought about the years we had all given so freely, believing in something that was never real. Tomorrow, that lie would finally catch up with them. And this time, there would be nowhere left to hide. The morning of the board meeting felt like standing on the edge of a fault line, waiting for the inevitable quake. I arrived at work early, blending in with the handful of overachievers, who always showed up before sunrise. I smiled at the receptionist, nodded at the janitor polishing the marble floors, and disappeared into my office as if it were any other day. But inside my bag was the tiny weapon that would unravel everything, the encrypted USB drive containing the truth. At exactly 8:45 a.m., I walked calmly to the anonymous reporting terminal set up for compliance concerns, an ironic little machine that the leadership team had always flaunted as a sign of their transparency. I slipped the drive into the port, typed a single line into the complaint form, urgent audit evidence, immediate review required, and clicked submit. And then I walked away. No fanfare, no grand declarations, just a quiet act of rebellion. The board meeting was scheduled to begin at 9:00 a.m. sharp. By 9:17, the building's atmosphere had shifted in a way that no memo or email could explain. Phones buzzed incessantly, assistants whispered in hallways, department heads canceled meetings without explanation. By 9:40, two board members, stern-faced, jackets still buttoned, marched into the executive suite without knocking. A few minutes later, security guards in plain clothes followed. I stayed at my desk, tapping at spreadsheets I could no longer pretend to care about, as the drama unfolded just floors above me. Word traveled fast, even in a company choking on fear. The anonymous tip had triggered an immediate internal review. Mr. Caldwell's financial records, once buried under layers of plausible deniability, had been dragged into the light. Wire transfers to shell companies, inflated consulting fees funneled to relatives, luxury vehicle purchases coded as client development expenses. The Bugatti invoice wasn't the beginning. It was merely the cherry on top of a sprawling mountain of rot. By 10:30 a.m., Caldwell had been pulled into a closed-door session with the audit committee. Witnesses said the shouting could be heard through 2 layers of soundproof glass. By 11:00 a.m., the CFO was escorted out by security. No time even to clear his desk. At 11:15 a.m., a company-wide email arrived. Effective immediately, the board of directors has placed several members of the executive leadership team on administrative leave pending investigation. We are committed to restoring transparency, accountability, and trust. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. In the lunchroom, small groups huddled together, eyes wide, voices low. No one celebrated, not yet. The wounds were still too raw, but there was a lightness in the air that hadn't existed in months, a cautious hope. I kept my head down, kept working, even as a few curious glances drifted my way. I knew what they wondered, but I had no intention of confirming anything. The point wasn't to take credit. The point was to break the cycle. Around 2:08 p.m., news broke outside the building. A respected financial news outlet had received leaked documents, copies of the same evidence I had sent to the board, released from a second anonymous source I had arranged. The headline was brutal. Luxury over loyalty, how corporate greed toppled a rising star company. Stocks plummeted within hours. Clients pulled contracts. The empire Caldwell built on lies and exploitation began to crumble in full view of the world. By 4:30 p.m., Mr. Caldwell's parking spot was empty, his name stripped from the executive roster, his access revoked. And still, I sat quietly at my desk, finishing out the workday like everyone else. No parades, no grandstanding, no final showdown. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that for once, justice hadn't just knocked politely. It had kicked the damn door off its hinges. They had gambled that exhaustion would keep us silent. They had gambled that fear would paralyze us. They had gambled that loyalty was infinite, no matter how badly it was abused. They lost. And this time, the house didn't win. Friday morning dawned with a biting chill in the air, an omen, perhaps, of what was about to unfold. I sat at my desk, hands steady, pretending to review quarterly projections while the real storm brewed several floors above me. The board meeting started at 9 sharp. Somewhere inside that conference room, a secure line had delivered my report to Mr. Langston's encrypted account, just as planned. I imagined the moment he opened it, the shifting in his chair, the tightening of his jaw, the silent calculation in his eyes as realization dawned. It didn't take long. At 10:23 a.m., an emergency alert went out. All department heads to remain at their stations until further notice. A heavy tension gripped the building. People whispered behind computer screens, speculating. Some thought it was a cyber attack. Others feared layoffs. No one imagined the truth. Not yet. At 11:07 a.m., security entered the executive wing. Not discreetly, not respectfully, purposefully. I caught glimpses through the glass partitions as they moved. Mr. Caldwell, red-faced and visibly shaken, arguing with two board members in sharp suits. The CFO, trying and failing to slide out unnoticed. The VP of Operations, white as a sheet, clutching a manila folder to his chest like a lifeline. Whispers turned into gasps. Phones buzzed with frantic texts. By noon, news leaked into the wider office. An internal audit had been launched. Multiple executives were under investigation. Mr. Caldwell had been relieved of his duties pending review. His official termination would follow within days. The Bugatti was no longer a symbol of power. It was a smoking gun. I watched from my seat as the empire they had built on arrogance and deceit crumbled in real time. No shouting, no riots, just a slow, inexorable unraveling. Papers gathered into boxes, names removed from doors, passwords revoked. Poetic justice delivered not by anger, but by precision. By 3 p.m., Mr. Caldwell's beloved BMW was gone from its usual front-row parking spot. His office, once filled with trophies, awards, and framed inspirational quotes, stood empty, the door ajar like a wound left unstitched. Somewhere deep inside me, a quiet satisfaction stirred. Not because I hated him personally, not because I craved revenge, but because for once, the lies hadn't won. For once, power hadn't protected corruption. The people who had treated loyalty like a commodity, who had gambled our livelihoods for their own luxury, had finally been forced to face the truth they thought they could bury forever. And the best part? They didn't even know who had exposed them. I remained just another face among the cubicles, another cog in the machine they had so carelessly tried to crush. But I knew. And that was enough. By Monday morning, the storm had cleared, but the landscape had changed forever. The office was quieter, the usual buzz replaced by a cautious optimism. New notices dotted the bulletin boards, compliance audits, leadership restructuring, a promise of renewed transparency and ethical stewardship. I didn't need to hear official announcements to know that Mr. Caldwell and his inner circle were gone for good. Their absence hung heavy, like the stale smoke after a fire. For a few more days, I stayed invisible, finished my reports, smiled politely, declined after-work drinks. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about choosing where and with whom I would build the next chapter of my life. When the job offer came, it almost felt surreal. A Fortune 500 company, better pay, better culture, an environment that valued transparency not as a buzzword, but as a foundation. The recruiter said they had heard about the compliance movement at my old company. "We need people like you," she said. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about remembering that my value had never been tied to the titles, the salaries, or the approval of people who couldn't see past their own greed. My value had always been mine. I had just forgotten for a while. On my last day, I packed up my office slowly. No fanfare, no farewell party, just quiet closure. Before I left, I slipped a small item into my bag. A copy of the Bugatti invoice. Not out of spite. Out of remembrance. A symbol. A reminder that illusions, no matter how grand, are still illusions. And that truth, when wielded wisely, has a power all its own. As I stepped out of that building one final time, the sun caught the edges of the glass towers around me, setting them ablaze in gold and fire. I felt lighter than I had in years. This wasn't just the end of a job. It was the beginning of reclaiming myself. No one, no boss, no company, no paycheck gets to decide your worth. Only you do. If you've ever had to walk away from something you thought you needed, only to find yourself stronger for it, share your journey in the comments. Let's celebrate the battles that built us, not the ones that broke us. And as for the Bugatti, Last I heard, it was quietly returned to the dealership after the investigation. A shiny, hollow trophy that couldn't save the ones who had forgotten that power built on exploitation is always temporary. Some things, after all, can't be bought, and integrity tops that list.